There is a massive, fundamental difference between building an app that sells targeted ads and building a firewall that stops a hostile nation-state. My brothers, Julian and Marcus, never understood that distinction. To them, technology was a playground for profit. They built a fintech empire moving billions of dollars a day, fueled by an arrogance so deep it was practically woven into their source code. They believed that because they could manipulate user engagement, they were the undisputed masters of the digital universe. In their curated world, I was just the punchline to a long-running family joke. While they were buying matching penthouses, I was quietly serving as a cyber warfare officer in the United States Air Force. To them, the military was an archaic institution for people lacking entrepreneurial vision. For a decade, every Thanksgiving, I was treated not as an equal, but as the family's resident, low-tier IT support. They would ask me to reboot their home routers or troubleshoot their smart thermostats. They handed me tangled cables with a condescending pat on the shoulder, seeing a woman in uniform and assuming I was a glorified help desk technician. I never corrected them. When you operate in the dark, silent trenches of global cyber warfare, tracking advanced persistent threats from foreign intelligence agencies, you learn that ego is a massive security vulnerability. I spent my 20s dissecting malware designed to take down power grids. Yet they would smirk across the dining table, asking if the military had finally upgraded its computers. The loudest people are always the easiest targets. You let them talk, you let them believe they are the smartest men on earth. Because true intellectual dominance does not announce itself with a press release. It operates in the shadows, it observes, and it waits for the inevitable moment when the illusion of safety violently shatters. That moment arrived on a Tuesday morning. Arrogance is a virus, and unfortunately for my family, they had infected their entire corporate infrastructure with it. Julian and Marcus had prioritized speed over structural security, ignoring basic digital hygiene to push their latest financial product to market. They left a back door wide open, and a highly sophisticated state-sponsored cyber syndicate walked right through it. In minutes, a devastating zero-day exploit bypassed their expensive firewalls. The siege was absolute. Millions in assets were instantly frozen. Their entire user database was encrypted and locked behind a ransom protocol they couldn't even begin to decrypt. Their company, their billions, gone in a handful of keystrokes. Panic strips away the veneer of Silicon Valley invincibility instantly. They bypassed their PR team and called the federal government, begging for immediate intervention. They expected to bully a mid-level bureaucrat to scream at a suit until their toys were handed back to them. But when you suffer a breach that threatens the national financial infrastructure, you don't get customer service. You get cyber command. You get a tactical response team authorized to officially seize your compromised servers by force. And they had absolutely no idea that when those heavy federal doors finally opened, the senior tactical commander walking into the briefing room to take total control of their corporate survival was the exact same woman they used to ask to fix their Wi-Fi. Growing up in the shadow of Julian and Marcus was an exercise in invisible existence. Our household was a temple dedicated entirely to their potential. They were the golden boys of the new digital frontier, teenagers who were coding rudimentary platforms while the rest of us were just figuring out the world. My parents, who barely understood the technology their sons were building, were mesmerized by the venture capital that started flowing into our home before the boys had even graduated. The narrative was set early and aggressively. Julian and Marcus were the visionaries, the brilliant minds destined to reshape the global economy. I was simply the younger sister, a quiet, pragmatic anomaly who didn't fit into the high-gloss, fast-paced mythology they were writing for themselves. While they were busy constructing polished user interfaces designed to harvest data and maximize consumer engagement, I was in the basement, taking apart the physical hardware. I was fascinated not by flashy applications on a screen, but by the hidden, vulnerable architecture that allowed those applications to exist. I wanted to understand the structural integrity of networks, the silent pathways where true power actually moved. But in a family obsessed with unicorns and initial public offerings, a desire to protect the infrastructure is viewed as a lack of ambition. To them, maintenance and security were blue-collar tasks, jobs you outsourced to the lowest bidder so the real geniuses could focus on disruption. When I announced my decision to join the United States Air Force and commission as a cyber operations officer, the reaction wasn't pride. It was a suffocating, collective pity. We were sitting around the expansive granite island in my parents' kitchen, celebrating Julian's latest funding round. I told them I was heading to specialized technical warfare schools. Marcus actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound that I can still hear perfectly. He leaned across the marble countertop, swirling an imported pale ale, and asked why I would voluntarily choose to work in a dusty government sub-basement when he could just get me a low-stress job managing the IT help desk at his startup. He offered it as a charitable handout to the sister who simply couldn't hack it in the real world. That fundamental disconnect defined every interaction we had for the next 10 years. They built their fintech empire, a sprawling, unregulated behemoth that moved billions of dollars across international borders with the tap of a touchscreen. They were hailed as industry titans, surrounded by sycophants who reinforced their belief that they were untouchable. I, on the other hand, disappeared into the classified, windowless vaults of United States Cyber Command. My world was defined by absolute secrecy, crushing responsibility, and zero public recognition. My team was tasked with hunting advanced persistent threats, highly sophisticated, state-sponsored hacking syndicates probing the nation's critical infrastructure for weaknesses and planning catastrophic digital strikes. The contrast in our daily realities was staggering, yet they remained blissfully ignorant. A stressful day for Julian involved a minor dip in user engagement metrics that briefly annoyed his shareholders. A stressful day for me involved neutralizing a sleeper virus embedded in a regional power grid by a hostile foreign intelligence service, preventing a blackout that would have cost countless civilian lives. But because I couldn't discuss my operations, because I couldn't leverage my successes into stock options, they assumed I was doing nothing of value. The silence required by my security clearance was interpreted as a profound lack of achievement. Every holiday gathering became a masterclass in psychological restraint. I would sit in their glass-walled living rooms, listening to them proudly discuss their aggressive data harvesting tactics, completely oblivious to the massive, glowing security vulnerabilities they were baking into their own platforms. And inevitably, without fail, one of them would turn to me with a condescending smile, hand me a malfunctioning tablet, and ask if the military had taught me how to do a hard reset. The emotional toll of being chronically underestimated by the very people whose catastrophic blind spots you are trained to identify is a very specific type of psychological warfare. You watch them dance blindly on a minefield, knowing you hold the map, but knowing they would rather detonate than take directions from you. They truly believed their immense wealth and their rapid coding cycles made them invincible. They believed the rules of engagement didn't apply to Silicon Valley disruptors. They were building a fragile empire of glass, entirely blind to the stones being gathered in the dark, and I was strictly forbidden from warning them. The illusion of control is the most dangerous narcotic in the modern corporate world, and the technology sector is its primary distributor. For my brothers, Julian and Marcus, that illusion was absolute, impenetrable, and entirely subsidized by venture capital. They had spent the better part of a decade constructing an environment where friction simply did not exist. If they wanted a new feature deployed, it happened overnight. If they faced regulatory pushback, their lobbyists smoothed it away before breakfast. They lived in a frictionless vacuum of their own design, a high-altitude boardroom reality where they honestly believed that their ability to write code that manipulated consumer dopamine levels somehow equated to mastering the fundamental laws of the universe. They were arrogant because their environment had never provided them with a consequence severe enough to teach them humility. But physics, both physical and digital, remains undefeated. You can ignore structural vulnerabilities for years, prioritizing speed and profit over safety and defense, but eventually the architecture collapses under its own hollow weight. When the catastrophic failure finally arrived, it did not announce itself with the dramatic flair of a Hollywood movie. There were no flashing red lights in their sleek, minimalist headquarters. There were no blaring alarms echoing through the open-plan office spaces. True, devastating destruction in the digital age is profoundly, terrifyingly silent. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. At exactly 9:14 in the morning, the core database of their financial platform simply stopped responding. For the first 4 minutes, the internal engineering teams treated it as a routine glitch, a minor load balancing issue caused by high traffic. Julian, sitting in his corner office with a panoramic view of the city skyline, barely looked up from his artisanal coffee. Marcus fired off an irritated message to their lead developer, demanding the server be reset so they could get back to their morning strategy meeting. They were annoyed, entirely unaware that the floor beneath their empire had just ceased to exist. By 9:20, the annoyance had mutated into a low-grade confusion. The servers were not rebooting. The backup redundancy protocols, which they had proudly touted to their investors just a month prior, were failing to initiate. It was at 9:26 that the silence was finally broken by a single, chilling realization. Their lead security engineer, a young man who had been routinely ignored for months when he requested funding to patch critical infrastructure vulnerabilities, walked into Julian's office. He was physically trembling. He didn't use corporate jargon. He simply stated that the entire network architecture had been locked down from the outside, encrypted with a military-grade algorithm that they did not possess the key to unlock. The mechanism of the breach was a masterpiece of hostile engineering. It was not a smash-and-grab operation orchestrated by amateurs looking for a quick payout. It was a highly sophisticated, multi-tiered zero-day exploit deployed with the clinical precision of a state-sponsored intelligence agency. The intruders had likely been quietly residing inside their servers for months, mapping the network, identifying the exact locations of the master databases, the user financial records, and the proprietary algorithms. They had waited patiently in the dark, gathering the keys to the kingdom while Julian and Marcus were busy giving keynote speeches at industry conferences about their visionary leadership. And then, in a coordinated strike that took less than a millisecond to execute, the intruders turned the locks. They severed the company's internal controls, encrypted the entire database, and effectively took a multi-billion-dollar corporation hostage. The psychological collapse of men who have never known failure is a fascinating and brutal process to observe. When the realization finally fully materialized in Julian's mind, that he was entirely locked out of the empire he had built, that millions of users' funds were frozen, and that his company's valuation was dropping by hundreds of millions of dollars with every passing second, his initial reaction was raw, unfiltered entitlement. He immediately reverted to the only strategy that had ever worked for him. He tried to buy a solution. He authorized his crisis management team to instantly transfer whatever sum of cryptocurrency the attackers were demanding. He assumed this was simply a high-stakes transaction, a business deal to be negotiated and settled quickly so they could manage the public relations fallout. But wealth cannot decrypt an AES-256 encryption protocol without the master key. Money cannot negotiate with a mathematical certainty. The ransom note they finally received was not a demand for a quiet payoff. It was a distraction, a smokescreen designed to buy the attackers time while they began exfiltrating massive amounts of sensitive financial data out of the country. When the private cybersecurity firm my brothers retained for $3 million a year finally admitted, after 6 agonizing hours, that they were completely outmatched and out of their depth, the true horror of the situation settled over the boardroom. They were not dealing with a rogue hacker in a basement. They were dealing with a hostile nation-state. Their company was no longer a business entity. It was an active crime scene and a critical vulnerability in the national economic infrastructure. The sheer injustice of their previous arrogance began to peak in this moment of crisis. Even as their network burned to the ground around them, Julian and Marcus attempted to control the narrative. They frantically tried to suppress the information from leaking to the press, attempting to downplay the severity of the breach to their board of directors. They believed that they still possessed the authority to manage the fallout. They could not accept that they had been reduced to collateral damage in a geopolitical conflict. The moral tension of the situation was suffocating. They had collected the data of millions of ordinary citizens, profited immensely from it, and left it completely unguarded because proper security did not drive quarterly revenue. And now, the bill for their hubris had arrived, and it was entirely unpayable. While they were pacing the floors of their glass-walled offices, screaming at their lawyers and desperately calling in political favors from senators they had funded, I was sitting in a windowless, heavily fortified, climate-controlled vault inside the headquarters of United States Cyber Command at Fort Meade. The air in the sensitive compartmented information facility, the SCIF, was perpetually cold, filled only with the low, steady hum of heavy server racks and the quiet, deliberate keystrokes of 50 elite cyber operators. We do not panic in the SCIF. We do not raise our voices. We operate with a cold, terrifyingly calm efficiency. My monitors were illuminated with the real-time telemetry of the attack. The moment their servers had been compromised, the anomaly had triggered automated tripwires deep within the federal monitoring systems that watch over the nation's critical financial sectors. We had been tracking this specific advanced persistent threat group for over a year. We knew their signatures, their methodologies, and their ultimate objectives. We watched the exfiltration happening in real time. I sat in the darkness, my fingers moving across a mechanical keyboard, tracing the exact digital footprints that my brother's highly paid private consultants couldn't even perceive. I was looking directly at the gaping digital wound in their network, understanding immediately that their entire corporate infrastructure was irreparably compromised. The turning point began forming the moment the incident was officially classified as a Level 4 national security threat. Because Julian and Marcus operated a fintech platform that processed a significant percentage of daily domestic transactions, their failure was no longer a private corporate matter. It was a systemic threat to the economy of the United States. The jurisdiction instantly shifted. The private sector was officially removed from the equation. Their expensive lawyers, their crisis PR teams, their private security contractors, they were all instantly rendered entirely irrelevant. The order came down directly from the absolute highest levels of the Department of Defense. We were not authorized to offer them a consultation. We were not authorized to help them restore their business operations. Our mandate was surgical and uncompromising. Deploy a forward tactical response team to their physical headquarters, sever their remaining connections to the global internet, officially seize physical custody of their servers under federal emergency authority, and contain the blast radius of the attack by any means necessary. As the senior tactical commander of the incident response unit, I was handed the operational dossier. I looked at the name of the company printed on the manila folder. I looked at the names of the CEO and the COO, Julian and Marcus. The same men who had smugly handed me a broken router at Christmas, asking me if the military paid me enough to buy my own laptop yet. I did not smile. I did not feel a sense of vindictive joy. True professionals do not operate on emotion, they operate on discipline. But beneath the stoic exterior, a profound psychological complexity settled in my chest. The moral scales of our entire family dynamic were about to be violently, permanently recalibrated. I authorized the deployment. We moved out in a convoy of unmarked federal vehicles, cutting through the city traffic with silent urgency. I sat in the back of the lead command vehicle, reviewing the seizure protocols, perfectly composed, mentally preparing for the moment the heavy glass doors of their penthouse office would open. I knew exactly what I was walking into. I knew they would be expecting to meet a subservient government bureaucrat they could intimidate and direct. I knew they were preparing to dictate the terms of their own rescue. They had absolutely no concept of the storm that was pulling up to their front door, and they had absolutely no idea who was holding the lightning. The glass-walled headquarters of their fintech empire was located on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper that dominated the city's financial district. It was an architectural monument to the frictionless reality they had constructed. Everything was sleek, transparent, and designed to project an aura of effortless innovation. But when the elevator doors opened and my tactical response team stepped onto the executive floor, the friction they had avoided for a decade hit them all at once. The atmosphere was thick with a frantic, uncoordinated panic. Dozens of highly paid engineers and executives were running through the open concept workspaces, staring at dead monitors, clutching tablets that no longer connected to anything. It looked less like a corporate headquarters and more like the deck of a sinking luxury liner. My team moved through the chaos in complete, disciplined silence. We were a physical manifestation of the reality they had tried to ignore. We were dressed in dark, sterile tactical gear, carrying heavy hardened Pelican cases containing offline decryption hardware and secure localized network nodes. The tech employees parted for us, their eyes wide, recognizing instantly that whatever authority they thought they held in this building had just been completely superseded. We did not ask for directions. We did not check in with the frantic receptionist. We moved in a coordinated formation straight toward the executive boardroom at the end of the hall, where I knew the central nervous system of their collapsed empire was currently gathered. The boardroom was a sprawling expanse of frosted glass and imported mahogany. When my lead agent pushed the double doors open, the room was vibrating with chaotic, useless energy. Julian was pacing furiously at the head of the massive table, screaming into a phone, his perfectly tailored suit jacket discarded on a chair, his tie ripped loose. Marcus was hunched over a laptop, surrounded by three terrified-looking cybersecurity consultants who were rapidly typing on isolated machines, desperately trying to map a network that no longer belonged to them. When we entered, Julian slammed his phone down on the table. He didn't see a federal task force, he saw a service industry that had arrived late to fix his problem. He immediately reverted to his default setting, aggressive, condescending command. He marched toward my lead agent, a massive, stoic former Marine who specialized in physical network interdiction. Finally, Julian barked, waving his hand dismissively toward the door. It took you people long enough. Listen to me very closely. I have a press conference in exactly 2 hours to assure my shareholders that this is a minor localized outage. I need you to bypass whatever localized encryption these script kiddies deployed, restore the primary database from the offshore backups, and get my platform back online immediately. And I want the name of your director so I can explain how unacceptable this response time has been. He was giving orders to a federal cyber operations unit as if he were ordering a coffee. He believed that his status as a billionaire CEO granted him operational command over the United States military. The sheer, blinding arrogance was breathtaking. He was standing in the epicenter of a national security crisis, demanding that the military help him manage his public relations. I let him finish. I let the silence hang in the air for exactly 3 seconds, allowing the weight of his absolute ignorance to settle over the room. Then I stepped out from behind the heavy frame of my lead agent. I was wearing standard operational dress, dark slacks, a tactical jacket with federal insignia, and a lanyard holding a top-secret clearance badge that granted me access to rooms Julian couldn't buy his way into with his entire net worth. I stood perfectly still, my expression entirely neutral, mirroring the cold, unyielding architecture of the systems I protected. When Julian's eyes finally focused on my face, the psychological short circuit was instantaneous and profound. His mouth opened, but the aggressive tirade died in his throat. He blinked, a rapid, frantic fluttering of his eyelids, as his brain desperately tried to reconcile two entirely incompatible realities. The woman standing in front of him, commanding a team of heavily armed federal cyber agents, was the exact same woman he had mockingly offered an IT help desk job to over Thanksgiving dinner. Marcus looked up from his laptop. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and sickly under the harsh fluorescent lights. "What?" Marcus stammered, his voice cracking, the polished executive persona shattering into pieces. "What are you doing here? Did Mom tell you what happened? You shouldn't be here. We need actual federal clearance. We need the real cyber command, not you." That was the second emotional hit. Even now, with their empire burning to the ground, with a heavily coordinated tactical team standing in their boardroom, the deeply ingrained family mythology refused to die smoothly. They still desperately wanted to believe that I was just the little sister playing dress-up. They wanted to believe that this was a misunderstanding, a cosmic joke, because the alternative, that I was actually the one holding the keys to their survival, would entirely destroy the hierarchy that defined their self-worth. This was the deeper layer of truth exposed. Their entire existence was predicated on the belief that they were the apex predators of the intellectual world. To accept my authority was to accept their own profound vulnerability. But I was not there to navigate a sibling rivalry. The internal realization that washed over me was a profound sense of liberation. The invisible labor of the last 10 years, the suppressed anger at their condescension, the quiet indignity of fixing their routers while they mocked my service, none of it mattered anymore. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need them to finally understand my worth. My worth was an objective, verifiable fact backed by the full authority of the United States government. The power shift wasn't a family drama, it was a federal mandate. "I am the real cyber command, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet, calm, and carrying an absolute crushing weight that instantly silenced the room. I did not smile, I did not gloat. I spoke with the clinical precision of a surgeon diagnosing a terminal illness. "I am the senior tactical commander of this incident response unit, and as of 60 seconds ago, you are no longer in control of this facility, this network, or this company." Julian tried to rally. He tried to puff out his chest and leverage his non-existent authority. "You listen to me," he said, taking a step forward, pointing a trembling finger at my face. I don't care what badge you're wearing, this is my company. These are my servers, I have a board of directors to answer to. You cannot just walk in here and. I can and I have, I interrupted, my tone slicing through his panic. I stepped forward, forcing him to physically step back. You don't have a localized outage, Julian, you have a catastrophic, state-sponsored breach. A foreign intelligence service has been inside your network for 6 months because you refuse to patch a structural vulnerability in your API to save on development time. They aren't just locking your database, they are exfiltrating the financial records of 22 million Americans. This is a level 4 national security threat. I pulled a heavily redacted federal warrant from my jacket and dropped it onto the mahogany table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Under the authority of the National Cybersecurity Protection Act, I am officially seizing physical and digital custody of all servers and communication nodes within this facility, I stated, watching the last remnants of his ego permanently collapse. You do not have a company right now, Julian. You have a crime scene, and you are disrupting my ability to secure it. The narrative pressure became suffocating. The three private cybersecurity consultants Marcus had hired slowly pushed their chairs back, silently signaling they were stepping completely away from the blast radius. Only my brothers remained, isolated on an island of their own catastrophic incompetence, staring at the sister they never bothered to see. I didn't wait for them to process the shock. I turned my back on them, dismissing their presence, and looked at my lead agent. Initiate hardline sever, I ordered. Cut all external fiber connections to the building. I want this entire floor air-gapped from the global internet. Deploy localized nodes and begin mirroring the encrypted drives. Nobody touches a keyboard in this building unless I authorize it. My team moved instantly, a synchronized machine executing protocols with lethal efficiency. Agents fanned out, connecting hardened decryption terminals directly to the boardroom's master access ports. Marcus watched in horrified silence as an agent approached his laptop. Wait, Marcus pleaded, his voice thin. He reached out to cover the keyboard. You can't just shut us out, we have proprietary algorithms in there. If you take the network completely offline, the automated trading systems will fail. We'll lose hundreds of millions, you have to let us initiate a soft shutdown. He was begging. He still couldn't comprehend the scale of the disaster. He was worried about profit margins while a foreign nation was actively mapping the financial architecture of the country through a hole he had dug. I walked over to Marcus. I didn't raise my voice. I leaned in, delivering the reality check his wealth had shielded him from his entire life. Your automated trading systems are already compromised, Marcus, I said softly, my voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. They aren't trading for you anymore. They are being weaponized to launder the assets you are crying about. Every second this network remains live, you are acting as an unwitting proxy for a hostile state. Remove your hands from the keyboard. He hesitated, searching my face for the younger sister he could manipulate. He found nothing but a firewall. Slowly, his hands began to shake, and he pulled them away from the laptop, his shoulders slumping in total defeat. I reached past him. I didn't type a complex sequence. I simply hit a single key combination that executed a hard override protocol. Instantly, the massive presentation monitors lining the walls, which had been displaying frantic error messages, went entirely black. The screens on every laptop snapped off. The chaotic hum of the server racks in the adjacent room violently spun down into a heavy silence. The blackout was absolute. We had severed the digital spine of their empire. The room was plunged into the eerie, quiet darkness of dead technology. The power shift was complete. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, pressing against our eardrums with a heavy physical weight. When you rip the digital nervous system out of a multi-billion-dollar tech company, you do not just stop the data flow, you kill the very soul of the environment. The lead indicators were dead. The relentless, comforting hum of the massive server cooling systems faded into an eerie, suffocating quiet. In that sudden darkness, stripped of their glowing dashboards, their real-time engagement metrics, and their digital illusions of grandeur, Julian and Marcus were reduced to their core components. They looked exactly like what they truly were. Two terrified men who had built a fragile house of cards directly on top of a massive tectonic fault line, entirely ignoring the tremors until the ground finally opened up beneath them. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound in the room was the heavy, rhythmic breathing of my tactical team as they systematically connected our independent, air-gapped hardware to the disabled network nodes. We were establishing a secure perimeter in the dark, preparing to dive into the digital wreckage and fight a shadow war against an invisible, highly lethal enemy. Julian stared at his reflection in the dead, black screen of the main presentation monitor. The reality of his complete disenfranchisement was finally piercing through the thick armor of his ego. He turned slowly, his eyes finding mine across the mahogany table. He looked exhausted, visibly aged by the realization that his wealth could not insulate him from his own profound incompetence. But the deep-seated reflex to assert dominance, trained into him by a decade of sycophants and venture capital, twitched one final time. He took a slow breath, trying to summon the commanding CEO persona that had evaporated just moments before. "You realize what you've just done, don't you?" Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, trembling whisper that was meant to be intimidating but only sounded desperate. "You haven't just shut down a platform, you've frozen the financial assets of millions of people. If we don't get those servers back online by the opening bell tomorrow, the market panic will destroy us. We will lose everything. The board will demand answers. The federal regulators will dismantle us. You are destroying our company. We are your family. You are supposed to protect us." It was the ultimate emotional manipulation, the final desperate play of a cornered narcissist. He was trying to weaponize our shared bloodline to force me into compliance, ignoring the fact that his reckless negligence had endangered the financial stability of the entire nation. He wanted me to prioritize his stock options over the integrity of the United States infrastructure. He wanted the little sister to fix his mess and quietly step back into the shadows. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I looked at the two men who had spent 10 years treating me like the hired help, handing me tangled cables and condescending advice, completely blind to the fact that I was the only thing standing between them and total systemic annihilation. I felt a profound sense of calm settle over my entire central nervous system. The moral and professional victory was not loud, it was quiet, absolute, and deeply grounded in reality. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I was standing mere inches from Julian. I kept my voice perfectly level, devoid of any anger or malice, projecting only the cold, unyielding authority of my command. "You still don't understand the scale of your failure, Julian," I said, every word carefully measured, dropping into the silence like stones into deep water. "You built a glass castle and left the front door wide open because a lock would have slowed down your user acquisition rate. You invited a hostile foreign intelligence service into the heart of the American economy because you thought you were too smart to be targeted. The market panic is the least of your concerns right now. The Department of Justice is your primary concern. And as for protecting you, my oath is to the Constitution of the United States, not to your board of directors." Marcus put his head in his hands, a quiet, ragged sob escaping his throat as the legal and financial reality of my words finally crushed him. Julian's jaw clenched, his eyes burning with an impotent, helpless rage, but he had absolutely no ammunition left. The power reversal was absolute and irreversible. "You guys code for profit," I stated, delivering the final, incontrovertible truth of our respective existences. "I code for national security. Sit down and let the adults handle the breach." They broke, the fight entirely drained out of Julian. His shoulders slumped, the arrogant posture collapsing into genuine despair. Without another word, he turned away from me, walked to the far corner of the boardroom, and sank into a leather chair. Marcus followed him, dragging his feet, looking small and broken in the shadows. They sat together in the dark, two dethroned kings watching their empire being dissected by the sister they had never respected. I turned my back on them and walked over to my lead analyst, who had just powered up our secure terminal. The screen glowed with lines of raw, encrypted data, the battlefield waiting for me. I pulled up a chair, placed my hands on the keyboard, and went to work, silencing the noise, ignoring the billionaires crying in the corner, and doing the invisible, essential job I was trained to do. That is the profound, grounded truth about actual intelligence and genuine power. It does not require a press release. It does not require a massive valuation or a corner office. Real intelligence is completely silent. It operates in the background, maintaining the structural integrity of the world while the loudest voices in the room boast about their own brilliance. And inevitably, when the screens go dark and the illusion of safety shatters, those who boasted the loudest are always the very first to panic. Have you ever been treated like an absolute amateur by people who were actually completely out of their depth? Have you ever had to sit quietly and endure the condescension of someone who confuses arrogance with competence, knowing all along that you hold the actual power? If you have ever had to silently prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, leave a laptop computer in the comments below. Let me know your story. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how loud they yell, it only matters who knows how to turn the lights back on.